You're listening to the ADHD Support Talk Radio podcast. ADHD Support Talk is brought to you by addclasses.com. Visit www.addclasses.com and sign up for free webinars and online events today. Hello, and welcome back to ADHD Support Talk Radio. I'm your co-host, Lynne Edris, and I am a productivity and ADHD coach, and I help overwhelmed professionals reduce procrastination, improve time management, and get more done with less effort so that they have more time, more energy, and more bandwidth for what matters most to them. If you guys know, I am a woman with ADHD myself, so I get where you are. I've been there myself. And I want to help you come out the other side yourselves, so to speak. I want to help you go from that constant state of chaos and underperformance to live a life of success and fulfillment in however you define success for yourself. You can learn more about me and what I do and the programs and services I offer at www.coachingadvantages.com. But today I have with me Dr. Sharon Saline. She's returning to talk to us about a really important topic. We're going to talk about shame in ADHD in a moment, especially with respect to how it impacts motivation. So welcome, Dr. Saline.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a great pleasure to be here, as always, to chat with you. I really enjoy our conversations.
I always do as well. One of my favorite ADHD professionals joining us again today. Well, tell our listeners a little bit about you, where they can learn more about you, all of that good stuff.
I'm Dr. Sharon Saline. I'm a clinical psychologist. I live and work in Western Massachusetts. You can find out more about me on my website, www.drsharonsaline.com. I've been working with children, teens, adults, and families living with ADHD for almost 30 years. I'm the author of What Your ADHD Child Wishes You Knew, Working Together to Empower Kids for Success in School and Life, and the ADHD Solution Card Deck for families. Both of which offer, the card deck is based on my 5 C's, which I outline in my book, and it gives you really practical, in-the-moment tools that you can use when you're challenged. I also write and host a Facebook Live for Attitude Magazine. My Facebook Live is every Friday at 4 p.m. There's a large international community, so I encourage you to join me there. And check out my page on Facebook and like it. I'll be your friend forever.
I didn't know you were doing lives. That's awesome. I'll have to check them out myself. Very cool.
Yeah, very exciting. They're very cool. Yeah.
That's neat. That's really neat. That's a nice way to engage with people, like, and let them really get to know you and kind of who you are. I think that's fabulous.
We started it to give people more support during the pandemic. And I have to say, Lynn, that it's grown into its own community. There are a lot of people from Australia, New Zealand. Someone was from the Ukraine last week, as well as all over the United States and Canada. So it's really a tremendous resource for people, and it's great to get to know them.
That's wonderful.
And answer their questions and stuff.
Yeah. Very cool. What a great way to support people, especially now, right?
Exactly.
Absolutely. Well, we're going to talk about shame. So, and off the top of my head, I'm totally blanking on what the title was. I'm so sorry, Sharon. We're talking about shame and how it impacts motivation, and really how shame is, kryptonite for so many of us with ADHD.
Mm-hmm. That's exactly right. And it's something that starts from early on and goes all the way up through the life cycle. So what happens, I think, to kids with ADHD, and for those of you who are adults, you have to think back to your smaller selves, even if you didn't know if you had ADHD. But you got feedback about being different. And that feedback probably wasn't always so positive. You were different, in quotes. You needed to do things in a way that was better according to what other people thought, which implied that the way you were doing it wasn't right or good enough. And so over time, there's this negative conversation that develops in your head where you've taken all these things that other people say to you, and now you've internalized it.
Yes.
And that inner critic is really kind of the bane of your existence. And we all have an inner critic. So I have one, Lynn, you probably have
Absolutely.
one.
Absolutely.
And
Yes.
that what we want to do is take that inner critic and really learn how to manage it a little bit more effectively. Are we going to erase it? Probably not. But we have to know when we can turn the volume down on it and how to talk back to the things it's saying to us. Because the things that it says to us, you're not this, or you are that, like you're not smart enough, you're not fast enough, you don't know how to manage your time, you're always late, et cetera, et cetera. You're disorganized, you're messy. All of those things um, form this negative self-talk. And over time, that what goes along with negative self-talk is one of its best friends is anxiety.
Yes.
Depression is also one of its friends. And so we start to feel worried about ourselves when we're going to mess up the next time, and we don't trust ourselves. And all of these things affect us in our daily lives, but particularly in relationship to motivation.
Absolutely. And it's I love that you say, that the inner critic probably doesn't go away altogether, right? But we
Mm.
absolutely have to learn to turn down the volume. We have to learn that we have a choice as to when we listen to that inner critic. But if we
Mhm.
aren't aware that that's what's going on, then we can't make a choice not to listen to the inner critic. I often tell my clients and remind them, I mean, it's something we probably all know, but don't pay enough attention to, that just because you think something doesn't mean it's true. And that's where we
Mm.
get ourselves in a lot of trouble with shame and how it impacts us in our lives all the way around, especially with respect to motivation and our ability to do things.
I love that. One of the things that, I think I do, and I think lots of people do, particularly those people who are differently wired, is that I compare my inside to other people's outside.
Yes.
And that is just a failure from the very start, because there's no way that I know what's going on in their lives or in their heads. All I see is the external presentation. And of course, social media exacerbates
Big
this, where
time.
we
Big
continue
time.
to compare our insides to other people's outsides. And if you have anxiety, which is one of my best friends, and you already kind of worry about certain things, then when you are looking at other people's outsides and they look so great, like, oh, I just wrote my second COVID book, or oh, I made these beautiful, cream puffs from scratch, and I made another like completely balanced healthy meal for my children that I'm posting on my Instagram. Like, how are we going to feel when we look at that? We want to feel like, oh, isn't that nice? But at some level, we're like, ugh, I can't do that. What's wrong with
Right.
me?
Right. And we make the assumption that that's all that there is, like that there isn't a
Right.
down, that there isn't another side, that there isn't an inside, that there isn't a negative. I always
Right.
like joke around, nobody puts their double chins on Facebook, right? What
That's
you
right. Or
see is only what people want you to see. You don't see the whole
that's right.
picture.
Right. And I think that one of the challenges with the pandemic and social media, as well as for people who already may not feel so good about themselves,
Yeah.
is that there's no way to escape whatever images are coming at you, because you can't like turn it off and go into real life where like, oh yeah, this I'm hanging out with my friends and they really love me, or I'm at my job, if you're, if you can go to work in an office. And so you're left with these sort of empty comparisons. And
Yeah.
I think that fosters that kind of shame, like the shame that somehow I'm different, i.e., worse than blah, 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 blah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It definitely exacerbates it. And I think a lot of us with ADHD have, especially by the time you get to adulthood and you haven't really managed it well most of your life, we have these really skewed perceptions of ourselves. We've lost faith in ourselves. We stop trusting
Hmm.
ourselves, and we have sort of,
Right.
a lifetime of what we think is proof that we don't deserve to trust ourselves and believe in
Mm-hmm.
ourselves,
Yeah.
and a lifetime of, I'm using my quotey fingers, of data, that we think is proof that these things are true, when in fact they're not. They're still our skewed perception of ourselves and our realities.
That's right. And I think one of the challenges in terms of combating that shame is actually noticing what you're doing well. And
Yes.
that's really hard to do. I know for me, I'm a social extrovert. And so one of the things that really makes me feel good and makes me feel good about myself is when I'm out in the world, laughing, talking, telling stories, seeing my clients in person, and I miss that. And I'm feeling a little bit like a little bit of an identity crisis. Like, well, who
Yeah.
am I? Because those things fill me up. And right now, most of us are a little, we're adrift. We don't have those mechanisms that we built into our lives. And so how can we start to feel better about ourselves? And this is a very simple intervention. I'm sure you've heard of it, but then there's been research about it. The one thing that you can do that's really helpful is at the end of each day, write down 3 things that went well. I actually do this. I've been doing it the entire I did it since the pandemic started because I was feeling kind of and not so great. And I do it, and have kept doing it. And I think that sometimes there are 5 things. Sometimes I really have to pull teeth, like I liked the clothes I wore.
The bar has to
I,
be moved on certain days,
the
I always
bar
say,
has to be moved
right?
certain days. But by noticing what's gone well, I'm actually building a reservoir of hope.
Absolutely.
And hope is something that really kind of confuses shame. I don't know what
Yeah.
to do with that, right? And so there's a difference between um, guilt, which is I did something wrong, according to Brene Brown, and she is the expert for all of us. The guilt, I did something wrong, and shame, I'm a bad person
Yes. Yep.
because I did this thing that went wrong.
Right.
And so what we need to do is live a little more in the guilt, which isn't sound like that's such a great choice, but it's better than the shame spiral. Because what happens with people with ADHD is they do something and then they wish they hadn't done that, and then they regret it, and they're regretting it for a while. For some people,
Hmm.
they chew on it, they can't let it go, particularly people who have RSD, who are very just wired kind of sensitively.
Yes.
And then for others, they do something they feel bad about, and they may let it go too quickly and not really give a genuine apology.
Yeah, absolutely. And shame, I love that you distinguish between guilt and shame. And I think that's a really important place, or a really important thing to pay attention to, right? If you shift into shame, I always think of shame as being a moral judgment. It's a values judgment. It's a judgment about
Hmm.
your character, right? I am
Yeah,
bad. I am a bad person. I am something.
right.
I don't have a strong enough work ethic. I don't try hard enough. Whatever those sort of moral judgments that we make about ourselves when we're in sort of that shame place, generally have nothing to do with whatever went wrong to begin with anyway. Right. And I
Hmm.
often talk about,
Right.
if you, until you can start to shift out of shame and out of blame, that sort of self blame and those moral values oriented judgments, you really going to have a hard time like coming up with solutions and finding ways to solve the problem and make sure it doesn't happen again anyway, because usually the actual problem has nothing to do with your character. It has nothing to do with your intentions. It has nothing to do with what you value. It has nothing to do with your work ethic. It has nothing to do with what you meant to happen. It has nothing to do with you not caring. It's about, either executive function challenge. I mean, what it's about is what needs to be addressed. So whether it's a memory issue or a systems issue or an executive function issue or whatever it is that caused the actual problem, when you're going into blame and shame, you're actually not addressing the problem. And
Correct.
you're making it worse to begin with. You're digging the hole a little bit deeper for yourself and making it harder for you to address the problem and actually make things different going forward.
I completely agree. And that's why, it's good to think about the shame spiral because you start off, you made a mistake and you feel
Yep.
bad about it.
Right.
Okay. But then you tell yourself all kinds of negative things. That internal critic is puffed up, dressed up, ready to go to the ball, marching around like they own the world, right?
Right.
And so, what they start to tell you is you're a bad person.
Yep.
And then you go further down the spiral, which is, of course, I shouldn't have tried that. What's wrong with me? I went outside. I never know when to stop, or, that was, I don't deserve that. I'm not worthy of that. And then we get to the bottom of the spiral, which is, I am a failure. I even loathe myself.
Yeah.
And that's the piece that we want to talk about because when you're in that spiral, when you feel like a failure, it's going to be very hard to get motivated for anything, you
Oh,
know? And
absolutely.
so, just like when we think about the anxiety cycle, there's a trigger, there's a a sort of distorted thought, worried thoughts, then cognitive distortions, then
Hmm.
inappropriate behaviors. We want to think about the shame cycle, right? And so the shame cycle is that there's an event, right? You've done something. And then the next thing that happens is the judgment about what you've done. That's the
Yes.
first thing that will decide. So if your judgment is, I really messed up, I'm a terrible person, then you're heading down the spiral. If your judgment is, I messed up, I'm not happy with myself, what do I need to do to make amends? Then you're
Hmm.
going somewhere else, right?
Yes. Right.
And
Absolutely.
that's the difference between the fixed mentality. I can't do this. I'm not going to be able to do this. Why bother trying? And hmm, how can I regroup, make amends, and try to change this part of myself? Like the
Absolutely.
oversharing part, maybe you overshare, right?
Right.
And then you say something and then you regret what you said for like 3 days and you're beating yourself up. What we want to do is say, okay, you overshared. What was going on internally that you felt that you needed to overshare? I know for me, if I overshare, it's because I'm anxious, I'm worried, I'm uncomfortable, um, or I'm not feeling like I'm connecting with someone.
Right.
And so we want to break that down so that we can know in the next time we're in a situation where we're having, that kind of feeling, we stop talking,
Yeah.
we remember. And that's hard for people with ADHD because the working memory is it really is kind of um, flooded at that time because working memory and emotional control are
Yeah.
deeply connected. And so you can't pull up from your past, this is the last time you overshared and what happened, or you can pull it up, but you pull it up after you've already opened your mouth,
Right.
right? Or you may not have the impulse control not to say it. So these are all things that go into this shame soup, so to
Yeah.
speak, and how we can get out. So you can either sort of spiral down or, climb the ladder into a different pond.
I like that a lot. I like that a lot. One of the ways I help myself, and I'm going to apologize in advance for the language, guys, but this is like my saying, the thing that I say to myself when I screw up, and and it happens on a regular basis, right? We're all human. I never pretend that I'm not. When I
Mm-hmm.
screw up and I either show up differently than I intend to, or do something that I didn't mean to do, or don't do something that I did mean to do, my thing that I do now, after years and years and years of working on this, is I tell myself, shit happens, now what? And that
Mm-hmm.
is in the moment, okay, you goofed, you screwed up. That's an acknowledgement. Now what? Meaning, now what do you need to
Mm-hmm.
do to make it right? Now what do you need to do to get moving in a better direction? Now what do you need to do to learn something from it so that you can use it going
Mm-hmm.
forward? But it shifts you right out of, everyone's tapes, everyone's, sort of automatic responses are different. Your inner critic is telling you different things than mine is, but mine's usually got something to do with, oh, here we go, right? Or
Mm-hmm.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
you think you know better, or but there's some old stuff
Mm-hmm.
there that will come up, and if I don't catch it before I start to get too far down that spiral, then it starts getting much harder for me to climb out of. So for me, knowing what to look for, kind of, if you think of the spiral as literally a spiral that physically goes down, the higher up on the spiral I can catch myself and start to shift, the easier it is and the less energy it takes, and the sort of the more likely I am to shift more quickly and not have it turn into a rumination or days where I feel like crap about something. And that, it takes a lot of awareness. It also takes a lot of what you were talking about earlier, Sharon, having that, like, being used to using that muscle where you give yourself credit for stuff, right? Where I smiled when you were talking about the three things that went well, or I did well. I call that inner gratitude, right? It's
Mm.
gratitude is important, but if you don't turn some of that inward, it's not going to be nearly as helpful. So whenever I have a client that's working on gratitude, or really just about anything, we want to make sure that you're turning some of that inward. And even if at the end of the day, and I remember this especially when my kids were much younger, sometimes I would have to use humor, maybe even a little bit of sarcasm, which probably isn't the most positive way to do it. But, some days you have to lower the bar pretty low. I remember literally trying to come up with my three things and thinking, well, I didn't burn the house down. Everybody is fed, even if it was Easy Mac, and they're all asleep, and, we live to see another day. And that's all with a little bit of sarcasm, a little bit of tongue in cheek, but it was an active, conscious, choice to find something that I could at least give myself credit for. And that takes a lot of practice.
It does take a lot of practice. And I think one of the things that undermines that kind of practice is feeling that you're alone, that
Yes.
you've done this and something is wrong with you, that that no one else has these challenges. And that's what happens from the blame that we get as children, and sometimes even as adults. People target their anger or frustration in ways that are humiliating,
Yes.
with put downs. And it's very hard, I think, for anyone to have the inner resilience to come back and say, you're telling me that I'm an irresponsible, lazy, um, manager because I missed this deadline. How it's hard to rebound from something like
Yeah.
that. And to be able to say, no, I'm not, when actually I did miss the deadline and I feel terrible about it. And it's my second deadline that I missed. So, what can I do to make that different? I can certainly really be on myself to make the next deadline, but I also might want to, I need to think about what support do I need so that it doesn't happen again. And how am I framing these challenges with my boss? Um, so I think one of the things that's really hard is that growth mindset versus a fixed mindset. So,
Right.
a lot of this fixed mindset is I'm a certain way and it's not going to change. I'm not that intelligent, I'm disorganized, I'm a poor planner, versus a growth mindset, which is I make changes based on my life experience. So, and I can grow and change. And I think that's really different, so that when someone is giving you feedback or your internal critic is saying something really nasty, that you can say, I'm I'm learning as I go. I
Yeah.
stumble, and that's part of the process. And I think that's important because a lot of times when people, we're not, are sort of stuck and they can't get started or they can't persist with something or finish it, there's, the accompanying uh, thoughts and feelings are really related to anxiety or sort of depressive failure mentality.
Hmm.
I'm never going to be able to do this. And so instead, what I really would encourage your listeners to think about is, what assistance do I need that I'm not enlisting to help myself? Because we all have tricks and tools. We all need a support team. I think about those cyclists on the Tour de France, they have a sag wagon, that's
Yeah.
got their food, or they get to a place and there's water, they ride by, they grab their water, they keep going, they get somewhere, someone's made lunch for them or whatever. What they have help. And so the question is, if you want to try to get out of the shame cycle, what kind of help would be useful to you, you know?
Absolutely. Absolutely. We all need support, right? None of us can
Yeah.
do life alone, period. And I think it's especially important to remember that right now when so many of us feel cut
Mhm.
off from our normal support systems and some of the reinforcement that we would normally have in non-COVID, like non-pandemic times. I think that's a great point.
Right. And so, we started by saying, well, how does shame affect motivation? And I want to circle back to that before we finish the hour. And we've had some allusions and little, pit stops along the way where we talk about it. But I think the main thing that I want to come back to is that if you feel fundamentally at some level bad about yourself, like you're a this and it's negative, or you're not, this, that, or the other, which is also negative. It's going to be hard to shift that into I can,
Yeah.
okay, versus I can't. And so, what I want you to think about is breaking down any kinds of tasks or problems or challenges into small pieces. Because when you are trying to, I'm going to, well, my New Year's resolution is I'm going to stop interrupting people. The chances of you succeeding at that, if you're me, are zero. I interrupt people. I came from a very intense family where we interrupt. We talk with our hands. That's who we are. So, but if my goal is I'm going to try to catch myself when I interrupt, or when someone tells me that I've interrupted, to say, you're right, I'm working on that, then I will have succeeded by the time next January comes.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what I'm talking about, sort of flipping things a little bit so that you can say, you're right, I need to work on this, or I am working on this. Here's how I'm working at it. I haven't succeeded yet, but that's okay because it's a process. We sometimes expect ourselves to make great changes when all we really can do are small little baby steps, and those small little baby steps ultimately add up into a big step.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Such a good point. And if you're not paying attention to your incremental improvements that are those baby steps that are moving you toward what you want, then you're never going to, first of all, know what works for you. You're never going to feel the feeling of success. You're not going to be reinforcing it, and you're not going to be building that new, database, so to speak, that proves to your inner critic that actually you can make these changes when you work on them. I think that's
That's
a
right.
great point.
Because having difficulty motivating yourself often comes from that internal conversation of I can't.
Yes.
I don't know how.
Right.
Um, I don't deserve.
Yeah.
Like I don't deserve help getting with this because I should be able to do it myself. And so, this is where shame kind of ladles it on.
Yep.
That's all that shame conversation. And so instead, what we want to do to help motivate ourselves is to say, I'm trying, I'm efforting. And in order for me to get to the next level, or meet a doable goal, I have to pivot. I have to shift, either, shift the bar. I have to shift my perspective. I have to make things, into smaller chunks, because that's
Hmm.
when I feel like I get something done. And then pat yourself on the back because you actually got that chunk done, instead of, ugh, I'm only one chunk done. I still have three more things to do. It's like,
Yeah.
dude, take a break. Say, hey, my goal was to do this thing. I did that thing. Okay, great.
Yay me, right? If we
That's
could
right.
all
I mean,
learn to just say yay me a few times a day and just recognize those little things and that they matter,
right.
the difference that can make in the bigger picture of your life, to start to give yourself credit for those little pieces is huge.
You know, there was a team of researchers in like the late, I don't know what you call them, the aughts. So in 2008, 2009, blah blah blah. And there's it was like the Happiness Project at the University of Pennsylvania, and there was a lot of research on positivity. And Dr.
Yeah.
Barbara Fredrickson found that the ideal positive ratio should be 3 positives for every negative.
Wow.
What do you think people tell themselves? For every positive, I would bet there's at least there's more, there's not for every positive, I'm sure there's more than 3 negatives.
Oh
It's
yeah.
not it's not
Yeah.
it's not even, when I talk to people around the country, they say, well, for every positive, with their kids who are alternative learners, they say, well, I think for
Mhm.
every positive, it's like maybe 10 negatives or
Yep.
15. And when I talk to kids or other adults, they're like, oh my God, no, it's like 30, because it's
20,
what people
30,
tell
40.
me.
Yep.
It's what I tell myself. So
Yep.
we're fighting an uphill battle in a way, because our internal critic has a lot of external support.
Yes.
Right.
That's a really good point. But if you don't start to pay attention to what goes well, what you're doing well, the changes that you're making, no matter how small they are, then you can't give that inner critic the support of the positives, right? You have to build that sort of repertoire of proof, that repertoire, that database of positive stuff, of successes, so that you can start to fight back with that inner critic a little bit. You don't have to listen, and you don't have to let that be the last word.
No, and I think it's actually helpful if you can come up with a phrase or two to say to your inner critic when they, appear in their, you know, tuxedo ready to go to the party of criticizing you, that you can say something like, I messed up, I'm learning, I got this. So, because that critic is coming up ultimately from a place of wanting to protect you from more
Yeah.
pain.
Yeah.
And so we're a lot of times people are mad at it. They don't like it, and they want to fight it. And what we want to do instead is let them know, you know what, I got this.
Yeah.
Some reassurance to remember that that critic is there because they're this part of you actually wants you to do well.
And
Give it
doesn't
a
want you to
name.
experience pain. Yeah, I love that.
No, give it a name. Obviously like negative Norman, or
Absolutely. I love that. I love
critical
that.
Carol, you know, and then and like describe it. Well, you're like a big amorphous blob, or you look like such and such, and so that you can actually have a little fun with it,
Yeah.
because shame doesn't like fun.
No,
You know,
shame wants to shut you
shame
down. It wants to
shame
keep you
wants to
safe.
shut you
Yep.
down. And the thing that's so amazing about people with ADHD is that they are, we're creative, outside the box thinkers. That's who people with ADHD are. And so that's part of why we have to play with this shame a little bit, you know.
Absolutely. I love that. I love that. This is good stuff. I mean, it really, to take control of the shame to the point where, again, you turn down the volume, as Sharon said at the beginning. It isn't the loudest voice. It isn't the only voice, right? You've got somebody else talking back to that inner critic. I was
Mhm.
telling a client this
Mhm.
morning that sometimes, I often think that it would be rather humorous if I could walk around with like speech bubble over my head, because a good part of the day I've got like, confident me. I've got sort of I always think of the bad like 70s movies with the angel on one shoulder and the devil on the other kind of a thing.
Right.
I've got the inner critic, and then I've got the inner cheerleader, and each one of them every now and then gets a little louder than the other. And I need to make sure that the me, in the present, is choosing which one to listen to actively, like as a
Mhm.
matter of
Mhm.
choice and as a matter of, conscious acknowledgement and choice. And I think we all have that. We want to make sure that we keep that inner critic turned down a little bit more, and, get that inner cheerleader working a little harder sometimes.
Yes, I agree. And I think that takes a lot of willpower and mindfulness. And
Absolutely.
so the way to start that is to really go back to that building block of what are 3 things that went well today. so that you can actually look back. Like I look back at my journal and my client, I'd have my clients do this too. And they're like,
Mm-hmm.
wow, look at all these things, so that you can actually fill up that tank so that when something comes and pokes a hole in it and there's a leak, you're not going to lose all of the, stamina and strength you have. You'll have a little leak, you'll patch it, you'll come back.
You'll move on. I love that. That's wonderful. And that's huge with respect to motivation, right? It's that,
Hmm.
as you said, the voice that's telling you I can't versus the voice that's telling you I'm working on it. We're getting better, right? We're making improvements. That I
Exactly.
think that's awesome. I think this is really good stuff. It's really important stuff. I mean, so much of what we struggle with comes back to what goes on between our ears. And when we can start to be a little more aware of those things, we can start to make some different choices about what we allow to go on between our ears, which is huge. Any
Hmm.
last thoughts you want to share with our listeners?
Thank you for asking. I think, yes, we need a statement or two to talk to our internal critic inside, of course, like what we want to say back to it. But we also need a statement or two to say to other people when we've disappointed them,
Yeah.
when we've let them down, when we're late, or whatever. So that is honest, that is genuine, and acknowledges what's going on with the tagline, I'm working on it,
Yeah.
you know.
That's huge. That's
I
huge.
like to say I'm living and I'm learning, you know, because that's what it's about, and and I think that that's hard to say, but that's really the fundamental of a growth mindset that we all want to have. And so that when people come to us and they say, I can't believe you, blah, 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 your response can be one of, oh my God, how can you talk to me that way? Or it could be, so I hear what you're saying is blah, blah, blah. I'm sorry I did that. I could do better. Or you're right. Or that's not the way I perceived it, but I hear what you're saying and I can work on it.
Yeah.
Because I think that just takes all the steam out of the other person. Will
Yeah,
also help
absolutely.
deflate that inner critic too.
Absolutely. I love that. That's wonderful. Thank you so much. This has been great. And I know we've given our listeners a lot to think about today and some good practical stuff to put in place. Absolutely. Thank you so much for being here, Dr. Saline. Tell our listeners again what your website is, where they can learn more about you. And
My website is www.drsharonsaline.com, and you can follow me on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and check me out on LinkedIn if you want. And I want to say thank you to you, Lynn, for having me. It's always so interesting, and I learned so much when we talk. Thank you.
I feel exactly the same. Thank you. Thank you so much for being here, Sharon. And thank you all for listening as always. I appreciate your attention. If you want to join us in the ADHD Support Talk Facebook group, you can ask questions, share your insights from any of the episodes. We'd love to have you be part of the community. Thanks so much. Take care, everyone. Until next time. Bye.
Bye.